As I was eating a hot dog at lunch, my bully came up to me and said, "Can I get a bite of your glizzy? The one in my pants or the one between my soft buns?" I tried to make a joke to deflect the tension. "Please, man, just let me get one bite. You don't understand." His voice sounded desperate, which was strange coming from him. "No, I really don't understand why I'd give my hot dog to you of all people. You're an asshole." 3 years of harassment had finally pushed me to my limit. Kane had made my life miserable since freshman year. He'd knock my books out of my hands in the hallway. He'd accidentally spill drinks on my homework. He'd spread rumors about me that weren't true. Just last week, he'd told everyone I still wet the bed, which wasn't even creative for a high school bully. The week before that, he'd posted an edited photo of me on Instagram that got 200 likes before I could report it. And now he wanted my lunch like I owed him something. His crew was sitting at their usual table across the cafeteria. Derek and Jamal were watching us with these stupid grins on their faces. They probably thought this was hilarious. Kane taking food from the nerdy kid again. Except something was off about the whole situation. Kane's friends weren't laughing like they usually did when he messed with me. I stood up, deciding today was the day I'd finally stand up for myself. My hands were shaking, but I tried to look confident. The hot dog was getting cold in my hand, and ketchup was starting to drip onto the tray. "You gotta walk. Leave me alone." Kane's face was sweating even though the cafeteria was freezing like always. His normally perfect varsity jacket was unzipped, and his shirt underneath was damp. His hands kept clenching and unclenching at his sides. This wasn't his normal intimidation routine where he'd tower over me until I gave him whatever he wanted. Instead of backing off like I'd hoped, Kane pushed me. Not hard, but enough to make me stumble backward. My lower back hit the edge of the table, and my tray slid dangerously close to falling. His face looked weird, though. Not angry like usual, but almost panicked. His skin had this grayish color, and he kept licking his lips. He kept staring at my hot dog and reaching for it like his life depended on getting a bite. "Just give me the meat." He lunged forward again. His movements were clumsy and uncoordinated, not like the star quarterback who could thread a football through a tire from 50 yards. He stumbled and caught himself on the table. His breathing was all wrong, too. Fast and shallow, like he'd just run laps, but he'd only walked across the cafeteria. Something inside me snapped. Years of being pushed around boiled over, and I threw a punch. It wasn't a good punch. I'd never been in a real fight before. My fist connected with his jaw, but it felt like hitting a wall. Pain shot through my knuckles immediately. The weird thing was, I barely grazed him. My knuckles skimmed across his jaw with about as much force as a high five. But Kane's legs buckled like someone had cut his strings. His eyes rolled back, showing nothing but white. His arms didn't even come up to break his fall. Kane went down hard. Way harder than Ice Spice's downfall. His body hit the cafeteria floor with a sick thud, and then he didn't move. His head bounced once off the linoleum, and then stayed still. His right arm was twisted under his body at an angle that looked painful. The cafeteria went dead silent for about 2 seconds before erupting in chaos. "Oh my God, he killed him!" Someone screamed from across the room. "Kane! Kane, wake up!" His girlfriend River ran over in her cheerleading uniform and shook his shoulders. Kids crowded around us in a circle with their phones out, recording everything. At least 15 phones were pointed at Kane's still body and my shocked face. The flashes from cameras made the scene feel like some horrible movie. I stood there in shock, staring at my throbbing hand. I hadn't hit him that hard. This made no sense. People were saying I must have snapped his neck on the way down or that he hit his head on the floor wrong. But I knew I'd barely touched him. "He's not breathing right," River screamed. "Someone help him!" More kids pushed in to see. Someone knocked over my tray, and the hot dog rolled across the floor, leaving a trail of ketchup that looked too much like blood. Everyone was talking at once, creating a wall of noise that made my head spin. They were all staring at me like I was some kind of monster. He pushed me first. I barely hit him. I tried to explain, but nobody was listening. "You knocked him out cold," some freshman yelled. "One punch," another kid said with something like awe in his voice. Someone had already called 911. Teachers pushed through the crowd, trying to control the situation. Mr. DeCastro, the gym teacher, dropped to his knees beside Kane and checked his pulse. His face went serious as he put his ear near Kane's mouth. Mrs. Mendez, the Spanish teacher, moved everyone back, yelling at kids to put their phones away. Kane still wasn't moving and his face had gone pale. River was crying and calling me a murderer. The principal's voice came over the intercom, telling everyone to remain calm and return to their seats. Nobody moved. Everyone wanted to see what happened to the toughest kid in school who'd just been dropped by the weakest. More teachers arrived trying to restore order, but the damage was done. My life as I knew it was over. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They put a neck brace on Kane and carefully lifted him onto a stretcher. One of them said something about blood sugar and asked if he was diabetic. That's when it clicked. The desperation in his voice, the begging for food, the way he'd gone down from barely a tap. "Who's responsible for this?" a police officer asked the crowd. Every single finger pointed at me. 30 kids all identifying me as the one who'd knocked out the school bully. A police officer walked up to me with his notebook out and started asking questions while everyone watched. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I tried to explain what happened, but the words came out jumbled and wrong. The officer wrote everything down and told me to wait in the principal's office while they sorted things out. Mom had to leave work early to pick me up, and the ride home was silent, except for her asking why I couldn't just walk away. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I kept seeing Kane's gray face and the way his eyes rolled back when he fell. The desperate way he'd grabbed for my hot dog played over and over in my head. Part of me felt guilty for hitting him, but another part was angry that 3 years of his bullying had led to this. I'd roll over and try to clear my mind, but then I'd remember the sound his head made hitting the floor. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an email from the school. The formal language made my stomach drop as I read about my temporary suspension and the disciplinary hearing scheduled for next week. Words like violation of conduct code and potential expulsion jumped out at me. My whole future suddenly felt like it was hanging by a thread over one stupid punch that barely even connected. Around noon, Christine Barnes called from the assistant principal's office. She explained the hearing process and what evidence I could submit in my defense. Her voice sounded sympathetic, but she made it clear the school had a zero-tolerance policy on fighting no matter what the circumstances were. She said I could bring witness statements and any video evidence that showed Kane pushing me first. An hour later, Raj Webster reached out through email. The school counselor offered support sessions and help creating a safety plan for when I returned to the school. His message was the first one that didn't make me feel like some kind of criminal. He wrote that he understood this was a difficult situation and that making mistakes didn't define who I was as a person. That afternoon, River posted a long Instagram story that made everything worse. She called me a violent psycho who could have killed her boyfriend and said I should be expelled or maybe even arrested. The post got hundreds of likes and comments within an hour with people agreeing I was dangerous. My few friends who tried to defend me in the comments got attacked and called enablers. Then someone posted a second video from a different angle that changed the conversation. The new footage showed Kane stumbling and swaying before I even threw the punch. One commenter pointed out he looked drunk or high, which started a whole debate in the comments. People started arguing about what was really wrong with him and whether I was actually defending myself or not. Officer Powell called that evening asking for a formal written statement with exact timeline and details about the incident. He mentioned several witnesses had come forward with different versions of what happened, and they needed to sort out the truth. He said I should write down everything I remembered, including Kane's behavior before the punch and exactly what he said to me. 2 days later, Mom drove me back to the school to clean out my locker while classes were in session. The hallways were mostly empty, but Kane's teammates were hanging around near the gym. They all glared at me as we walked past, and Derek made a throat-cutting gesture when the teachers weren't looking. Mom grabbed my arm and pulled me along faster while I tried to ignore the sick feeling in my stomach. That night, an anonymous DM popped up on my phone from someone claiming to know the truth. They said Kane had type 1 diabetes but hid it because he thought it made him look weak to his dad and the team. The message said I should tell the authorities about his condition, but I wondered if sharing someone's private medical information would make me worse than him. The person said they'd seen Kane have low blood sugar episodes before, and that's definitely what happened in the cafeteria. The next morning, I decided to go to the hospital to check on Kane, even though Mom said it was a bad idea. When I got there, the nurse at the desk looked at my name and shook her head. Molly Goff explained I wasn't on the visitor list, and she couldn't share any medical information about his condition. Through the door to his room, I could hear voices mentioning something about glucagon and a hypoglycemic episode, which basically confirmed what the anonymous message had said. Everything was starting to make sense, but it didn't change the fact that I'd still thrown the punch that knocked him down. The next morning, Mom handed me an envelope from the school that had arrived by certified mail. My hands shook as I tore it open and read the official notice. The suspension would continue until the disciplinary hearing scheduled for next Thursday at 2 o'clock. They listed all the possible consequences in this cold, formal language. Detention was the minimum, but expulsion was right there at the bottom of the list. My stomach twisted into knots reading each punishment they might give me. Mom read over my shoulder and kept sighing like this was the worst thing that ever happened to our family. I spent the rest of the morning in my room staring at the ceiling and replaying everything. Around noon, Raj called to schedule our first counseling session for that afternoon. Mom drove me to the school even though I wasn't allowed inside for classes. We went through the side entrance to the counseling offices where other suspended kids waited. Raj's office had motivational posters and a stress ball collection on his desk. He asked me to walk through exactly what triggered me to throw the punch. We spent an hour breaking down every feeling from the past 3 years of bullying. He brought up something called restorative justice, where Kane and I would meet with mediators. The idea made me want to throw up, but Raj said it might help both of us move forward. He gave me worksheets about anger management and recognizing my triggers before they exploded. That evening, my phone buzzed with notifications from Instagram. Derek had posted a meme of my school photo edited with boxing gloves and the caption, David versus Goliath. The comments underneath weren't funny at all, though. Someone wrote they knew where I lived and would be waiting when suspension ended. Another person said I better watch my back because Kane's friends don't forget. I screenshot everything in case I needed it for evidence later. Mom saw me looking worried and asked what was wrong, but I didn't want to stress her more. Dad came home from work and they discussed hiring a lawyer for the hearing. The retainer fee was $2,000, which made Mom's face go white. We didn't have that kind of money just sitting around. Instead, I spent hours that night reading the Student Code of Conduct online. The self-defense section was only 2 paragraphs long and super vague. It said students could defend themselves from immediate physical harm using reasonable force. But what counted as reasonable when someone pushed you first? I highlighted every section that might help my case and took notes. Around midnight, I couldn't sleep, so I opened my laptop and started typing. The letter to Kane came out in bursts of typing and deleting. I wrote that I was sorry for punching him and that he got hurt, but I couldn't make myself apologize for defending myself after 3 years. I saved it as a draft and stared at the screen, wondering if sending it would help or hurt. The next morning, Officer Powell called with an update about criminal charges. Kane's family hadn't decided yet whether to press assault charges against me. He explained the medical situation made everything more complicated legally. They were waiting for Kane to fully recover before making any final decisions. Powell said this was actually good news, since immediate charges usually meant they were serious. He reminded me to keep documenting everything and stay out of trouble. That afternoon, Christine Barnes sent a long email about the hearing process. She listed everything I could submit as evidence, including witness statements and video footage. The email explained I had the right to bring one support person, which would definitely be Mom. She attached forms for character references and a template for my written statement. The deadline for all evidence was 3 days before the hearing. I forwarded the email to Mom and started making a list of people who might write character references. 2 days later, Barnes sent another email with huge news. The school had released the security camera footage to the administration for review. The video clearly showed Kane shoving me first before I stumbled backward, but it also showed my punch and him hitting the floor hard. She said the footage would be considered during the hearing, but warned it didn't look great. Even though Kane pushed first, my punch was what caused him to fall and get hurt. The administration would focus on whether my response was proportional to his shove. I watched the attached video file 20 times, trying to see it from their perspective. During my next session with Raj, I brought up wanting to talk to River. She'd been posting about me every day, and the rumors were getting worse. Raj said he could reach out to her counselor about arranging a mediated conversation. He warned me River was still really upset and might not be ready to listen, but he thought trying to communicate was better than letting anger build up more. He helped me practice what I would say without making excuses or shifting blame. 3 days later, Raj called with surprising news about River. She'd agreed to meet, but only for 15 minutes with both counselors present. He said this was actually progress, since she'd originally refused any contact. We scheduled it for the next afternoon in the conference room at the school. Raj spent an hour helping me prepare talking points that acknowledged her feelings. He reminded me not to get defensive even if she said hurtful things. The goal was just to share my perspective and maybe reduce some of the online harassment. The meeting happened 2 days later in the conference room near the main office. River walked in wearing her usual pink hoodie, but her eyes were red and puffy from crying. She sat across from me with her counselor while Raj sat next to me with his notepad ready. The room smelled like old coffee and cleaning spray. River wouldn't look at me at first and kept picking at her nail polish, which was chipped and faded. Her counselor started by explaining the ground rules about respect and listening without interrupting. I nodded and tried to sit still even though my leg kept bouncing under the table. River finally looked up and her voice cracked when she started talking. She said Kane had been hiding his diabetes since middle school because his dad thought it made him look weak and would hurt his football career. Her hands shook as she explained how he'd skip meals and ignore his blood sugar to seem normal. She still blamed me for throwing the punch, but admitted Kane shouldn't have been pushing me around for 3 years or trying to take my food when his sugar was crashing. The words came out fast like she'd been holding them in too long. I told her I was really sorry Kane got hurt and explained I never wanted him in the hospital. My voice stayed steady, even though my stomach felt tight. I didn't make excuses for the punch, but tried to explain how scared I felt after all those years of him knocking my books down and spreading lies about me. River wiped her eyes with her sleeve and said she understood even if she couldn't forgive me yet. The meeting ended after 20 minutes, and we left through different doors without saying goodbye. That afternoon, a crazy rumor started spreading through group chats that I'd poisoned the hot dog to get revenge on Kane. The story got wilder with each retelling until some freshman actually stopped me in the hall, asking if I was secretly a chemistry genius who'd planned the whole thing. I showed him my last chemistry test with a C- grade, and he looked disappointed. The rumor kept going anyway because people wanted drama more than truth. 2 days later, Barnes called to say 2 students had come forward with written statements about Kane acting weird that morning. They weren't friends with either of us, which made their stories more believable. One girl described seeing him sweating through his shirt in first period math, even though the room was cold. The other kid said Kane stumbled into a desk during second period and seemed confused when the teacher asked if he was okay. Both statements mentioned he looked gray and kept rubbing his eyes like he couldn't focus. Barnes said these would help show Kane was already in medical trouble before our fight. The next morning, Mr. Castro submitted his own official statement to the administration. He wrote that he'd noticed Kane showing clear signs of distress when he entered the cafeteria that day. His professional opinion as a gym teacher who'd seen plenty of sports injuries and medical issues carried real weight. Barnes emailed me a copy and said it would definitely be considered during my hearing. Castro described Kane's unsteady walk and rapid breathing, which matched what I'd seen. He also noted that my punch looked more like a defensive push than an actual attack based on the security footage. River posted on Instagram that night with an update about Kane's condition. She said he was awake and stable, but had suffered a severe hypoglycemic episode that almost put him in a coma, plus a mild concussion from hitting the floor. The post said he wouldn't play football for the rest of the season, which she blamed on me, even though the diabetes was the real problem. She got hundreds of comments with people taking sides and arguing about whose fault it really was. Some kids said I was a hero for standing up to a bully, while others called me dangerous. The next afternoon, Officer Powell called with news that made Mom cry with relief. Kane's family had decided not to press criminal charges after reviewing all the evidence. They acknowledged the medical component of what happened, though they still thought I used too much force for the situation. Powell said this was the best outcome I could hope for given the circumstances. He reminded me the school hearing was still happening, but at least I wouldn't have a criminal record. Mom and I spent the rest of that day organizing all my evidence into a clear timeline. We printed screenshots of River's posts and the witness statements and put them in a binder with tabs. Mom helped me practice presenting my case without getting emotional or defensive, even though my voice kept shaking when I talked about the punch. We went over the timeline again and again until I could tell it clearly. She made me practice admitting my mistakes, while also standing firm that Kane's medical emergency wasn't something I caused. That evening I checked Instagram and noticed River had edited her old posts about me. The word murderer was gone from all of them, though she didn't apologize or say she was wrong. The edit felt like progress, or maybe Kane or his parents told her to dial it back before the hearing. Either way, seeing those posts without that word made my chest feel less tight. The night before the hearing, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind kept replaying everything from the hot dog joke to the punch to Kane hitting the floor. I felt oddly calm about telling the truth tomorrow, even though I knew it could go badly. I decided to admit the stupid joke about hot dogs and soft buns and own that I threw the punch, but also make it clear that Kane's diabetes and his choice to skip meals caused the real emergency, not my weak hit that barely connected. The morning of the hearing, my stomach felt like it had rocks in it, and I couldn't eat breakfast even though Mom made eggs. We got to the school 30 minutes early, and the empty hallways felt weird without all the usual noise and kids rushing around. The conference room they picked for the hearing looked nothing like our normal classrooms with its long table and serious chairs arranged like a courtroom. Christine Barnes sat at the head of the table shuffling papers, while Officer Powell stood by the door checking his phone. Raj was already there with a yellow legal pad and gave me a small nod when we walked in. Mom squeezed my shoulder before we sat down, and my hands started sweating so bad I had to wipe them on my jeans every few seconds. Barnes explained the whole process would take about an hour, and they'd review everything before making a decision about my punishment. She said I'd get to tell my side after they went through the evidence, and asked if I understood, which I nodded, even though my mouth felt too dry to talk. The assistant principal pulled up the security footage on a laptop and turned it toward everyone, while Officer Powell moved closer to watch. When my turn came to speak, my voice cracked on the first word, but I pushed through and told them everything from the beginning. I explained how Kane had been messing with me for 3 years, starting with small stuff like knocking my books down and getting worse over time. I told them about the Instagram posts and the rumors, and how teachers never seemed to notice or care when I tried reporting it. I described that day in the cafeteria, and how weird Kane looked with his gray skin and sweaty face, even though it was cold. I admitted making the stupid hot dog joke which made Mom shift in her chair, but I figured being honest was better than hiding anything. I explained how Kane pushed me first, and I felt trapped with everyone watching, and 3 years of anger just exploded out of me. I told them about the punch and how weak it was, and how shocked I felt when Kane went down so hard from barely being touched. The administrators listened without interrupting, then started going through all the evidence piece by piece on the laptop screen. They had statements from Mr. Castro about Kane's weird behavior before lunch, and 2 other kids who saw him stumbling in the hallway. They showed the nurse's report about my knuckles, which confirmed the impact was minimal, based on the lack of swelling or bruising. Barnes asked if I could have walked away instead of throwing the punch, and I had to admit, maybe I could have, but it didn't feel like it in that moment. She asked if I understood that the school has 0 tolerance for fighting regardless of who starts it, and I said yes, even though it didn't seem fair. Officer Powell mentioned Kane's medical records showed dangerously low blood sugar at the hospital, which explained why he went down so easily. They played the cafeteria video frame by frame showing Kane's shove, then my stumble backward, then the punch that barely grazed his jaw. Watching it from the camera angle made it obvious how much Kane was already swaying before I even touched him. The way he collapsed looked more like someone fainting than getting knocked out, which everyone in the room could see clearly. They paused the video right when Kane hit the floor and his head bounced, which made my stomach turn all over again. After 20 minutes of discussion while Mom and I waited in the hallway, they called us back in to hear their decision. Barnes said they were giving me 3 days suspension, which I'd already served, plus mandatory conflict resolution training every Tuesday for 6 weeks. I'd also have to do 6 counseling sessions with Raj to work on anger management and better ways to handle confrontation. The fighting incident would stay on my permanent record, but wouldn't affect college applications as long as I had no more disciplinary issues. They strongly encouraged me to participate in a restorative justice meeting with Kane once he returned to the school, though it wasn't required. Mom asked about the 0 tolerance policy, and Barnes explained they were taking the medical circumstances and bullying history into consideration for a reduced punishment. When I got back to the school 3 days later, the hallways felt different with everyone staring and whispering as I walked to my locker. Some kids nodded at me like I was a hero for standing up to Kane, while others moved away like I might snap and punch them too. The drama kids thought I got off too easy, while the kids who'd been bullied thought the school should have done more about Kane years ago. By lunch, the attention had already started shifting to new gossip about someone getting caught with answer keys for the SATs. Teachers kept checking on me between classes, and Raj stopped by my locker twice to make sure I was doing okay. Kane's friends kept their distance after apparently being warned by the administration to leave me alone or face their own consequences. Derek walked past me once and just stared but didn't say anything, which felt like progress compared to his throat-cutting gesture from before. 3 weeks passed with things slowly getting back to normal before the restorative justice meeting got scheduled. Kane and I sat across from each other in Raj's office with River there too, plus Barnes taking notes in the corner. Kane looked thinner, and his varsity jacket hung loose on his shoulders like he'd lost weight since the incident. We went around the circle with Raj guiding us through establishing boundaries and expectations for moving forward. Kane agreed to stop all harassment immediately, and I agreed to give him space and not talk about his medical stuff with other kids. We both agreed to be civil in the hallways, but understood we'd never be friends, which honestly felt like the best possible outcome. Kane admitted he should have just bought lunch that day, or asked nicely instead of trying to take mine by force. He explained his blood sugar was so low he wasn't thinking straight, but said that wasn't an excuse for 3 years of bullying. I apologized for the punch and the crude joke about hot dogs and soft buns, even though part of me felt like he deserved worse. River mostly stayed quiet, but said she was sorry for calling me a murderer on social media, which felt like something Barnes probably made her say. The meeting wrapped up with us signing some papers about the agreement, while Raj scheduled my first strategy session for the following Monday. That first session had me sitting in his office practicing breathing exercises that felt stupid at first, but actually helped when Derek shoulder-checked me in the hall 2 days later. Instead of swinging like my body wanted to, I counted to 4 while breathing in through my nose and walked away, even though my fists were clenched so hard my nails left marks in my palms. Raj had me write down every time I felt that anger bubble up and what triggered it, filling 3 notebooks over the next month with situations that ranged from kids whispering about me to seeing Kane's empty seat in chemistry class while he recovered. We practiced scenarios where someone pushed me or called me names, with Raj playing the bully while I learned to recognize that hot feeling in my chest before it turned into something physical. The breathing stuff worked better than expected, and the counting gave my brain something to focus on besides wanting to hit back. After 6 weeks of these sessions, Officer Powell called to say he was closing the case officially, since Kane's family hadn't pursued charges, and the school investigation was complete. Barnes scheduled a meeting where she pulled out my file and showed me the disciplinary note, explaining that as long as I stayed out of trouble through graduation, it would get sealed and colleges would never see it. The relief hit me so hard I actually started shaking right there in her office while she pretended not to notice and kept talking about scholarship applications and SAT prep. She even wrote me a letter of recommendation that mentioned my growth through adversity without specifically naming the Kane incident. The school board met 2 weeks later and passed new requirements that all athletes had to have medical action plans filed with the nurse, especially for conditions like diabetes or severe allergies. Kane's dad apparently fought it hard according to the gossip, but the board voted unanimously after the superintendent mentioned liability concerns. They also started stocking glucagon pens in the nurse's office and training coaches on recognizing low blood sugar symptoms. 3 months crawled by with winter break and spring semester starting before things felt actually normal again. I grabbed my usual lunch of pizza and chocolate milk and sat at my regular table by the windows while Kane and his crew took their spot across the cafeteria. We both looked straight through each other like the other person was invisible, which worked perfectly fine for both of us. His friends still acted tough but never came near me, and my friends stopped asking about the fight after the first few weeks. The cafeteria felt peaceful for the first time in 3 years, just regular noise and drama that had nothing to do with me, and I could finally eat without watching my back or protecting my food. All right, that's all for me today, folks. Thanks for letting me poke around and throw some questions out there with you all. It's always fun hanging out like this. Subscribe for more content like this.